Hello, my name is Adina Claici. I am very happy to join your roundtable on the role of competition policy in promoting economic recovery. Thank you very much for the invitation. And the angle of my short intervention will be the role of public support. I will be happy to share with you the thoughts that I have developed together with my state aid team on the developments regarding public support in the past months, especially in light of the crisis of the COVID crisis. Public support is nothing new. However, the magnitude and the spread that the public support took in the past months require at least a very careful assessment. The benefits and the negative effects of public support are known to some extent, but it is good to review this in light, as I said, of the unprecedented amount of public support that has been given around the world in the past months. I will touch upon 3 points. First of all, we all believe and see that public support is undoubtedly necessary in these times, so that is less controversial, the need for public support. Second of all, notwithstanding this necessity, it is not very clear how much public support is sufficient to repair the damages caused by this crisis. So I would say that this is a part where more careful analysis and assessment is required. And last but not least, as we know, public intervention has the potential to distort competition in the market, the free functioning of the market. And therefore, we also have to be careful in the design of public support, how to minimize these negative effects. In preparing this little intervention, I was advised to share with you a couple of slides. So I'm gonna do this right now, where I will try to illustrate the 3 ideas that I just anticipated. So, as I said, the general objective for aid, for public support, seems quite non-controversial. And in order to illustrate this, I picked an obvious industry that was very, very hardly hit by the health crisis, which is the airline industry. And the data shows very clearly that relative to last year, the air traffic declined up to 85% at the beginning of the pandemic. It recovered slightly to a figure of only half less than last year during summer when restrictions were eased to some extent. However, it's going down again now in the second wave. So it's non-controversial that the airlines industry is very, very hardly hit, which shows that yes, there is need to support companies, there is need to support this industry. This is, of course, not the only industry that was hit, but it helped me, finding these numbers helped me illustrate my point. My first point that it is the aid, public support is undoubtedly necessary. Okay. So my second point here was that, okay, notwithstanding the need for public support, the question, the more in-depth question that we have to answer, how much is sufficient? How much is necessary and how much is sufficient? Why shouldn't policymakers give more public support? Obviously, because of its negative effect, negative distortive effect. So therefore, it has to be carefully measured. In economics, we call this a counterfactual. A counterfactual means a situation where, a hypothetical situation where the crisis did not occur. So as you can clearly see in my very stylized graph, You can imagine this is the evolution of a company or of an industry that was going upward, and when the crisis hit, then this evolution turned downward. So with the pandemic, the actual situation of our company or our industry worsens relative to the situation without the pandemic. What I also illustrated here, it's a hypothetical counterfactual where without the pandemic, our industry or our company would have followed this growth path farther on. This difference between the counterfactual scenario and the actual situation with pandemics is actually the damages that the company or the industry suffered due to this pandemic. Now, the big question for policymakers is how much should we cover for these damages? Should we bring companies or industries back on their growth path before the COVID? Is this that simple? Well, the policy dilemmas are many, and the options for policymakers are many as well. These options range from the extremes of doing nothing, not intervening at all, to restoring the economy to the pre-crisis level, so the maximum intervention. Obviously, doing nothing is not a real option, it's just for illustration here. Now, what are the relevant trade-offs that policymakers encounter in choosing when they are faced with these decisions, should go in one direction or the other? One very clear trade-off encountered in public intervention is the one between efficiency and equity, because public intervention can fulfill these two very general goals: improve efficiency in the market where there are some market failures, or improve equity if there are some social objectives that policymakers are following. They are both good for society. Unfortunately, intervening in one may be at the expense of the other. So if policymakers want to improve efficiency in the market, it may be that this has to be done at the expense of compromising on the equity. So therefore, it's not so easy. I put here on balance a very simple, this trade-off in very simple terms, that the more policymakers intervene, the more costly it is for the taxpayers. So it's better for society, but more costly for taxpayers. So this is the cost of the intervention, the cost for the taxpayers, and the cost in distortions in competition. And on the other balance, we have the benefits for society. We did say that intervention in times of such types of crisis is not contestable. So there must be there. In order to be a little bit more concrete on how to solve these dilemmas, how we economists can help policymakers solve this dilemma, I highlighted here a few factors that we believe matter and have to be taken into account when designing the optimal support. First of all, we have to be aware of whether we are talking about very short-term effects of the intervention. So do we want to help companies survive, exit the crisis, or do we want to help them on a long term to return on the growth path they had before the crisis? It's very important to establish in our objectives whether we are talking what kind of time span we are envisaging. Second, what happens to demand? As we can see here, you saw in my example with the airlines, and due to the restrictions, this example can be applied in many other areas. Demand has considerably shrunk in this crisis. Now, this shift in demand, the question is this shift in demand going to be permanent or temporary? Again, the question is not black or white. Demand will probably redress to some extent. However, the question is how much. Also, it depends on how long this pandemic will last. We have some optimistic news now, but still there is some uncertainty left. So depending on how much this lasts, consumers, the habits of consumers may change forever in traveling for business, for example. Businesses learn that things can be done without so much traveling, then it may be that there will be some permanent shifts in demand. Maybe not at the level of decreasing by 85% that I showed in my graph before permanently, but there may be some permanent decrease in demand. So this is something that we should be careful in when design the support, because policymakers would not like to redress a company back to the growth path or financial structure before the crisis, knowing that they will never have the same level of demand as before the crisis. This has to be taken into account. Third, how do our markets look in terms of market structure? What are the barriers to entry? The lower the barriers to entry in the market, the lower it will be for the market to recover itself. So maybe the less scope for intervention. Last on my list, but not least, obviously, and by no means this is an exhaustive list, is the asymmetry of information between those who provide the funds and those who use the funds. Obviously, in any situation like this may give rise to free riding. How can policymakers be sure that those who apply for aid are those who were damaged, and those who applied for a certain amount of aid indeed need that amount of aid to recover and not less? How can they screen the let's say good firms from bad firms? Before the COVID crisis, there were many firms probably that were not viable. That might be close to being borderline bankruptcy. However, it's not so easy to separate the effects of the crisis from the effects of a simple bad management inefficiency of the firm. So this is something that has to be screened in order to avoid overcompensation with public funds. Finally, my third point was regarding the negative effects. Apart from the cost to society, the negative effects for markets of any public intervention are related to the distortions in competition. Now, competition policy has already taught us quite a few ways how we can limit distortions in competition. Inspired by what the European Commission is doing, I put here a few, the main ones. So there is a way to limit the competition distortions by beneficiaries of aid by imposing certain remedies that can be structural or behavioral. Both structural and behavioral remedies are encountered in many other competition instruments. Now, how effective they are and how viable they are also depends on how demand evolves. So, for example, if we impose a structural remedy on some firms to divest some assets to their competitors, is this a viable option if, in case demand decreases permanently? Is there enough interest for competitors to buy assets of the firms that receive support? So that's a question. Another instrument, another possibility to limit the distortions that the European Commission has used in previous state aid cases is clawback mechanisms. So asking companies to return the support given in excess of the needs. Now, again, how to limit the free riding? Companies, knowing that if they don't spend it all, they will have to give it back to the state. What are the incentives not to spend it all? What are the incentives to be efficient? So again, another question to check. Finally, this is not exactly a tool to limit the distortion, but is a question in the balancing of the positive and negative effects. We have listened more and more to other objectives that public support can fulfill, such as that can be national or broader, international or EU, such as the green and digital transformation. We hear more and more stakeholders saying, look, if these companies receive support for the crisis, at least they should use this money in a way to become greener and to contribute to the green transformation. What I wonder, what is not easy at all, is how are these going to be put on balance vis-a-vis other negative effects? Is competition policy going to be more lenient with companies that are more willing to engage in green investments? This is obviously not easy. I'm going to stop sharing because this was my last slide. And so what I put forward to you is more questions than answers, but I hope this can help the policy debate, and this can help the factors that we identified as relevant in the analysis of the positive and negative effects of public support may help policymakers in designing these public measures, and may help them ask the relevant questions, and obviously with the help of facts, use empirical evidence to see in which direction is more likely, which direction of the balance is more likely to prevail. Thank you very much for listening to my short recording, and I will be very happy to be in touch with anyone who is would be interested to follow up on any of these topics. Thank you.